Hey everybody, Chess Poems here. Let's dive into a game from the Herceg Novi Blitz tournament played in 1970 in Yugoslavia, now present-day Montenegro. This is a very important time in chess history, so I'll provide some context here. I'll timestamp the video below, so if you're just interested in the game, you can skip ahead. Anyhow, Herceg Novi was arguably the strongest Blitz chess tournament of the 20th century, and it started just days after the first of three Russia vs. the rest of the world events. Russia would go on to win two of those events, including the 1971 in Belgrade, as well as the event in London in 1984. In 2002, the rest of the world did win one of those events. Perhaps the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s foreshadowed the end of Russian dominance in chess. We do see today, with the invention of modern technology, that chess has largely diversified. Is it truly the world's game now? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Following up a solid performance in the 1970 event in Belgrade, where Fischer scored 3 out of 4 points with 2 wins and 2 draws, he looked to once again dominate the competition. Fischer would go on to play 22 5+0 games in this tournament against opponents including Tal, Petrosian, and David Bronstein. These opponents are also notable, as some of these games also resulted in a win or defense, so I'll be sure to link those below. Fischer ultimately crushed the competition with 19 total points at Herceg Novi, 17 wins, 4 draws, and only 1 loss, enough to beat a second place Mikhail Tal by 4.5 points. Okay, to start, we have e4, e6, the French defense, d4, d5 is on board next, then knight c3, and bishop b4, entering the Wiener variation, a move popularized by 19th century German chess champion Simone Wiener. Fischer responds with e5, the next most popular moves in this line being e takes on d5 or knight e2. After this, black plays knight e7, and Fischer asks the bishop what it's doing by playing a3. Typically, in the Wiener, black is okay with giving up the bishop pair in exchange for white's damaged pawn structure and slight lead in development. The important idea here is black now has targets to attack, and their attack will come quickly on the queen side. White's best chances in positions like this is to attack the king side. Black often decides to play uncastled, opting to just play king f8 instead, with some idea of scrambling to the queen side if necessary. Castling queenside also leads to a lot of complex lines in which black will sometimes even let white capture the pawn on g7 and or the pawn on h7 in exchange for half-open files on the king side where white is likely to castle. Korchnoi moves forward with the queenside attack, aiming for the pawn break on c5, and Fischer responds by looking to close down the queenside and gain some space by playing a4 here on move 7. Korchnoi looks to pressure the queenside immediately and plays an aggressive move, queen a5. This move does come with the tempo as it strikes a hanging pawn on c3. However, that's no big deal. Fischer plays bishop d2 to defend that weak point in his camp. Black develops again on the queen side, playing knight c6, and Fischer looks to create his play by establishing the attack on the king side. Queen g4 is played, and Korchnoi's response is pretty interesting. You can pause your video for a moment to just think about what black is trying to do next. Okay, so Korchnoi goes ahead and castles in this one. He's not afraid of the attack with the bishop on d2 and the queen on g4. The attack is not strong enough just yet. Moving forward, Fischer looks to establish his kingside presence further by playing knight f3, and black responds by going for the pawn break on f6, which is ignored by Fischer, who opts to play bishop d3 instead. One problem to note here with bishop d3 is that black now has 2 moves with tempo, or tempi. f5, which attacks the queen, and c4, which attacks the bishop. These are the moves we see in this game, and after white's queen and bishop retreat, black continues the queenside attack, going for the pawn break on b5. White can't take since the rook on a1 hangs, so Fischer instead castles and lets black capture on a5. And here on move 15, knight g5, it leads us to our next tactics puzzle. If you'd like to pause the video and solve this one, okay, the move of course is knight takes on d4, and this is working tactically since the bishop on d2 is unprotected. Fischer opts to capture the knight on d4, allowing black to capture the dark square bishop on d2. Remember, white's initial compensation was the bishop pair, so let's see how that impacts this game moving forward. Next, white plays queen h4, threatening mate in 1, and Korchnoi parries this threat with h6. And Fischer responds by attacking the queen on d2. If black were to take the bishop, you take the knight right back. After this, we see Korchnoi attack the queen with knight g6. Fischer responds by capturing the queen on d2. Black captures back, of course. Playing out a handful of more moves, we see that white is going to have a hard time cracking black's position. White has the center of the board, but it's unclear on how they can proceed. As play shifts to the queen side, the white knight and bishop look to be largely blocked out of play. After a few more moves, we get to our next puzzle and our final puzzle of the video. Move 23, rook a5. If you'd like to pause and solve this one, of course the move is knight c6, forking the rook and the pawn on d4. After knight c6 is played, the rook moves back, and Korchnoi captures that crucial pawn on d4, and the position really starts to crumble after this. This move is also a fork, so the bishop will have to defend the pawn that hangs on c2, and at this point, with proper play, the game is largely over, and playing it out has got to be pretty painful for the Fischer fan club. This pawn chain in the center of the board will look to push and ultimately create a pass pawn. That's what we see in this game. e4 with tempo, striking the bishop retreats, knight d4, attacking the bishop retreats again. Trading pieces is going to be bad for white, and playing out a few more moves, white is able to pick up the pawn on e4 because of the pin and the hanging rook on c8. However, this is no worry for Korchnoi. Playing this out a handful of more moves, white is down in exchange. More pieces come off the board. Black is ultimately forcing the rook off the board, and this pass pawn will ultimately have to be traded for the last minor piece. The king cannot stop the pawn advance, and after the knight takes, the rook takes back, and Fischer only plays this one out a few more moves before throwing in the towel. Anyhow, some takeaways from this game. On move 7, Fischer tries to close down the queenside and gain some space by playing a4, but this move is giving away a crucial tempo that white needs to develop the kingside attack right away with queen g4 instead. By move 16, Fischer also loses the bishop pair, which is the initial compensation for this Vinifer variation. White is left with the light squared bishop, which is technically the quote-unquote good bishop since white's pawns are fixed on dark squares. However, this general rule doesn't always apply. In this case, black's pawn structure is greatly restricting the light square bishop, which becomes a rather clumsy piece. Which square will it find a home on? For more information, check out the links below, and be sure to leave a comment, like, and subscribe. Have a wonderful rest of your day, folks.